It was supposed to be a simple favor. When my sister-in-law asked if she could host her baby shower at my house, I agreed without a second thought. After all, she was family, and we were on good terms, no reason not to help out. But what happened next completely blindsided me. I'm 32, married for 3 years to my husband, who's 35. We've been together for 5. Right now, though, we're in the middle of this long-distance phase since he's working away from home, only coming back every other weekend. It's not easy, but we've managed. We have a beautiful house that we bought just before he left. It's spacious, cozy, and conveniently located close to my parents, which makes visits a breeze. Honestly, I love living there. It's more than just a house, it feels like a home. When we had our housewarming party, people couldn't stop complimenting the place, even before we'd really settled in. Of everyone who admired it, my sister-in-law, Carrie, seemed the most taken by it. Carrie and I aren't exactly best friends, but we've always gotten along. So when she asked if she could host her baby shower at my house, I didn't hesitate. Why would I? She's pregnant, after all. Plus, I often find myself alone in the house, so meeting new people and having a change of scenery sounded nice. She even convinced me to take a day off work. The reason she gave made sense. She didn't want to pay for an expensive venue when I had such a beautiful home. Her own place was nice, but it wasn't nearly as big or as elegant as mine. Maybe the flattery worked on me, but in the end, I figured I had no reason to say no. We went through the whole planning process together. Carrie visited me almost daily for the past couple of weeks to discuss every detail, from the catering to the decorations. I was fully involved, right down to the smallest of details. I genuinely thought this would be a bonding experience, a chance to spend time together and grow closer. But then came the day of the event. The decorators had been setting up for an hour, and everything was coming together. Around 45 minutes before guests were due to arrive, Carrie showed up. She thanked me for all my help, and we chatted like we always did, nothing out of the ordinary. But then, just 15 minutes before the first guests were to arrive, she turned to me with a look that froze me in place. "Where are you going to spend the next few hours?" she asked. I was stunned. Was she joking? It was my house. I had assumed I would be part of the event. After all, I'd helped organize it. I was the one opening up my home for her, and I'd even brought a gift. So, I asked if she was serious, thinking she was playing some kind of prank. But no. With a completely serious face, she told me that she wasn't joking. She explained, matter-of-factly, that I hadn't received an invitation and that I wasn't even on the guest list. The realization hit me like a cold wave. But how could that be? I'd helped plan every detail. I'd made it clear I'd be there. In my mind, it was understood. How could I not be invited to something I had helped create? She assured me it was just a misunderstanding. She had assumed I was helping out in a professional capacity. But I'm not an event planner. I work in banking. I was furious, and I must have looked it because Carrie quickly backpedaled. She didn't want to argue, not with everything going on and her being pregnant. She told me this event was meant to be small, intimate, only close family and her immediate circle of friends. Unfortunately, I wasn't part of that inner circle. She urged me to leave before the guests arrived so there wouldn't be any drama. She didn't want to upset anyone, and certainly not me. I didn't even know how to respond. All I could feel was this growing sense of disbelief and hurt. Without another word, I stormed out of the room, retreating to the backyard. I needed to vent. So, I called my husband. Of course, he didn't answer. He was in a meeting at work. I was fuming. I needed someone to hear me out. So, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I called Carrie's husband, Jim. I wasn't close to him, but I knew he was a generally quiet guy, and after everything that happened, I just needed to get it off my chest. I ranted, telling him how hurt and upset I was by the way Carrie had treated me. He listened, quiet at first, not interrupting. After I finished, I apologized for unloading on him, but I needed to explain. I couldn't talk to her without risking upsetting her, so I turned to him, hoping he could talk some sense into her. Jim was apologetic on her behalf, which did help calm me down. Then he said something that gave me a little peace. "You don't need to leave your own house." "That's ridiculous. I'll be there in a few minutes. Just wait until I get there. I don't want you two upsetting each other more." I agreed. That seemed reasonable. I waited. 15 minutes later, just before the first guests arrived, the doorbell rang. I went inside, and there he was, Jim, looking somewhat surprised to see me still there. Carrie was, too. The three of us stood there, in the quiet tension of the moment, as everything about the situation hung in the air. The tension in the room was palpable as I stood there, feeling the weight of the situation press against me. Jim stepped in, his voice steady, yet firm, telling me that I had every right to stay and attend the baby shower. I didn't need to leave, he assured me. Carrie, however, wasn't so easily convinced. She tried to protest, her face twisted in frustration, but when Jim gave her a look, a glance sharp enough to cut through glass, she immediately fell silent. And so, there we were, both of us standing in the same room, yet the space between us felt wider than ever. Throughout the event, I could feel her eyes burning into me, sharp and accusatory. With every glance she threw my way, my resolve only strengthened. I made up my mind right then and there, I would never, under any circumstances, engage with her again. A part of me wanted to call off the whole baby shower. How could I continue with this charade? But as much as the thought gnawed at me, I couldn't bring myself to do it. I had worked tirelessly, putting in time and energy into organizing the event, and I didn't want it all to go to waste. And besides, once Jim had arrived, I couldn't bear to undo all of it. Not now. Not after everything. So, I decided to let the evening play out. I'd keep my composure, my dignity, and when it was over, I'd simply walk away. I wasn't going to waste any more energy on someone who had no respect for me. But Carrie! She couldn't even pretend to act civil. The evening was drawing to a close, and Jim once again found me to apologize for his sister's behavior. Carrie, on the other hand, refused to even glance in my direction. Jim, his tone apologetic, explained that she was furious, convinced that I didn't belong at the event, that I'd somehow forced my way in. I could feel the frustration bubbling inside me, but I kept it contained. At least the ordeal was finally over. Or so I thought. Later that night, once they left, I called my husband to fill him in on everything that had transpired. As expected, he was furious. He wanted to confront Carrie, to demand an explanation from her, but I knew better. The last thing I wanted was for him to get involved at that moment. Any confrontation would only escalate the situation, lead to more arguments, and make everything worse. I just wanted peace. Just a little bit of peace. But apparently, that was too much to ask for. The very next morning, my phone rang. It was my in-laws, and their tone was icy. They were furious. After the baby shower, when Carrie and her husband returned home, things had escalated. A huge argument had broken out between them. Jim had stormed out, refusing to speak to Carrie, refusing to speak to anyone in her family, including my in-laws. This was unheard of. Jim had always had a close relationship with his in-laws, family, friends, even, but now? It seemed as though they wanted nothing to do with him. They'd blocked him on social media. The silence was deafening. And somehow, it was all my fault. Or so my in-laws and Carrie seemed to believe. If only I had just kept quiet, swallowed my pride, and done what Carrie had wanted, none of this would have happened. I couldn't believe it. They were trying to pin the blame on me. Me? How could they not see what was right in front of them? It wasn't my fault. Carrie had been ungrateful. I had graciously allowed her to host the baby shower in my home, no strings attached. But instead of appreciating that, she humiliated me, telling me I didn't belong, making me feel like an outsider in my own home. How was any of that my fault? I couldn't hold it in anymore. I lashed out. I told them, no, I made them understand, I wasn't going to take the blame for this. It was on Carrie. She had been rude, disrespectful, and dismissive. And I wasn't going to let her off the hook for that. I told my in-laws, in no uncertain terms, that if my husband had been there, she wouldn't have dared to treat me like that. She knew better than to mess with him. But because he wasn't around, she took advantage of the situation. I didn't regret telling her husband what had happened. He was the only one in that room who had acted reasonably. He was the one who had seen through Carrie's behavior and had chosen to leave. And I supported that decision. I trusted his judgment. And if he wanted to divorce her, I was behind him. No question about it. I wasn't going to backtrack, apologize, or fix anything. I had done nothing wrong, and neither had Jim. When my in-laws tried to convince me otherwise, I shut them down. I didn't owe them an explanation, and I wasn't going to give them one. They could try their best to guilt-trip me, but it wasn't going to work. I wasn't about to be manipulated into feeling bad for something that wasn't my fault. They kept telling me that, because of my actions, Carrie's future child was somehow going to suffer. But I couldn't care less. That wasn't my problem. I ended the conversation, hanging up the phone, and since then, the silence between us has been deafening. They've been calling, leaving messages, trying to get me to respond, but I haven't. I'm tempted to block them, honestly. They keep insisting that whatever happened was between Carrie and me, and that I had no reason to drag her husband into it. But I didn't agree. If it was between me and Carrie, then it was my decision to tell her husband. He deserved to know the truth. He deserved to know what kind of person she was being. And now, they're trying to make me feel guilty about it. But I don't. Not in the slightest. The tension had been building for a while. I never thought I would find myself in a position where my own family would question my decisions so harshly. They had brought up that my children might grow up without a father figure, which felt like an accusation, an unfair stretch. How could they say that? I didn't even know how to respond. I thought about blocking them, cutting off the communication entirely, but something kept me from doing it. They had this way of speaking, of twisting things, that made me second-guess myself, even though my husband stood by me. He kept telling me, over and over, that I hadn't done anything wrong. It was Carrie's actions, not mine, that were to blame. He was going to try and talk to his parents, make them see that I wasn't at fault here. If anything, they should be reaching out to her, comforting her, not attacking me. But I was stuck, unsure of what to do. I didn't feel any guilt for my part, yet their behavior made me wonder, how could this get resolved? And what had Carrie even been thinking? Why did she act the way she did? I had no answers, none at all. I knew one thing for sure, the situation wasn't going to die down anytime soon, and I was growing weary of waiting for it to blow over. A week passed since the baby shower, and things had only gotten more complicated. Carrie and Jim were officially getting divorced. Jim had made the announcement on social media. Carrie hadn't said a word, not yet. I didn't think it would happen this quickly, but here we were. The petition had already been filed, and the proceedings were set to begin. I couldn't believe it. It felt like everything was unraveling faster than I could keep up. Jim had moved back in with his parents. The separation was official, and I couldn't ignore the reality of it all. The guilt, the doubt, it kept nagging at me. I hadn't thought I would speak to him after everything that had happened, but after talking it over with my husband, I realized that someone from the family needed to reach out to Jim. He hadn't blocked me, and I knew that meant there was still a chance for communication. So, I decided to send him a message, apologizing for the way things had gone down. But it wasn't a real apology. I didn't mean to admit fault, I just wanted to express sympathy, as if to acknowledge everything that had happened. When he responded, he could tell that I was struggling with guilt, and he reassured me. He said I shouldn't blame myself for any of it. He'd been on the edge for a while, he admitted. He needed someone to talk to, someone who wasn't going to judge him. And I, of all people, had been the one left with so many questions. I deserved answers. I needed them, too. So, I asked him point blank, what is really going on here? And when he finally spoke, I realized I hadn't known anything. We talked for a long time, and I learned more than I ever expected. The baby shower, it wasn't about me at all. Carrie hadn't just not wanted me there for the reasons she had claimed. It wasn't about keeping it small, as she told me. No, the real reason was much more about image, and she had been playing a dangerous game with it. She had invited me to her baby shower to pretend that the house where it was being held was hers, when in fact, it wasn't. She was trying to impress a friend with connections to a rich, industrialist family. She was hoping to convince the husband to invest in her future business. Carrie had been desperately trying to impress this woman, doing everything in her power to appear more successful than she really was. And so, she had invited me to that baby shower under false pretenses, hoping I would just blend in and not raise any suspicions. But I had fought back. I hadn't just let it slide. In the end, though, it didn't even matter. Carrie's friend had gotten sick that day and couldn't make it to the event. And yet, the damage had already been done. Jim confronted Carrie about her behavior when they got home, and her response was shocking. She admitted, in a roundabout way, that everything had been done for show, that she didn't want anyone to know the truth. She wasn't owning up to her actions. She wasn't apologizing to me. Instead, she brushed it all off like it was no big deal. This was a pattern for Carrie. She had been doing this for years, trying to live a life beyond their means, trying to make people think they were wealthier than they actually were. Jim had explained to her, time and again, that it wasn't necessary, that they were fine with what they had, but Carrie just wouldn't listen. She'd been trying to impress people who didn't matter, at the expense of her own peace of mind, and now, her marriage. It wasn't even the first time she had acted this way. Jim told me that it had started not long after their wedding, this need to create an image, to show off what they didn't have. And it had taken a toll. Jim had been holding it in, tolerating her behavior because of how much he loved her. But now, with a baby on the way, the stakes were higher. This pretense, this facade of luxury, it wasn't sustainable. They couldn't afford it. Jim was a real estate agent, Carrie worked in marketing, and though they weren't poor, they certainly weren't wealthy. They were comfortable, there was no reason for Carrie to keep up these appearances. But nothing seemed to stop her. She didn't want to hear it. Jim had tried to reason with her, but it was all falling apart. And as her behavior escalated, their problems only grew more intense. They were stuck in this cycle, and it was hurting them both. The tension was undeniable. Something had to give. The tension had been building for months. Jim and Carrie, once the picture of happiness, were now caught in a cycle of bickering that seemed endless. Every argument, every misunderstanding, chipped away at something vital. It wasn't just small things, it was the bigger picture of their relationship crumbling, piece by piece. After one particularly heated argument, following a seemingly innocent baby shower, Jim had had enough. He couldn't take it anymore. He confided in me that, even if I hadn't reached out to him that day, it was inevitable. The way things were going, he would have come to this decision sooner or later. And despite how difficult it was to admit, he insisted I shouldn't feel guilty about it. I spoke with my husband about it, seeking some sense of clarity. His perspective was that, while he felt sorry for Carrie, he didn't see any injustice in what had transpired. It wasn't as though Jim had suddenly given up on his marriage, he had been a good husband, from what we could tell. If he had made the decision to leave, it was because he had thought it through thoroughly. The situation wasn't just going to resolve itself. As much as I sympathized with Carrie, particularly given her pregnancy, I couldn't help but feel that she had dug this hole for herself. How could a grown woman let herself be consumed by the opinions of friends who meant so little? She was in her 30s, this wasn't high school anymore. It was time to leave that behind and face reality. But I still hoped they could talk. Maybe there was a chance for reconciliation. At the very least, I hoped they could have some space from each other, enough time to reflect on what they truly wanted. And yet, I wasn't going to get tangled in all of it. There was only so much I could do. I had to step back, for my own peace of mind. The drama wasn't mine to carry. I decided to block both Carrie and my in-laws, because, honestly, there was nothing more to say. The emotional weight of it all was too much, and I couldn't continue down this path. I wasn't sure what would happen next. Jim had already declared his intention to divorce, but his voice was still heavy with frustration when we spoke. He was torn. A part of him seemed to want to work it out with Carrie, to give her another chance. But she was being so stubborn, so resistant, that he couldn't figure out how to move forward. And here's where I get a bit controversial. Maybe, just maybe, they should try therapy. Maybe Carrie should consider it. It's not healthy to hold on to petty things, to chase after the approval of people who don't even matter in the grand scheme of things. The thought of them, tearing each other apart while carrying their child, broke my heart. Growing up in a home where your parents are divorced is never easy. I wouldn't want that for my future niece or nephew. So, for their sake, I hope they could fix things. I'd keep my distance for now, but I wanted the best outcome for everyone involved. As for my husband, he, too, was going to step back. He had his own thoughts on the situation, and we agreed that we'd stay away from the drama for the time being. This weekend, he was coming home, but he wasn't planning on visiting his parents. And that was fine. After all, I had nothing to feel guilty about anymore. A couple of hours later, my husband returned home. We sat down and talked, and the conversation shifted to Jim. He had kept in touch with him over the past few days. Jim had been clear, if Carrie apologized for everything, if she agreed to therapy, he was willing to give their marriage a second chance. That's all it took for him to feel that there was still hope for them. But my husband had yet to hear from Carrie. She was avoiding everyone, he said. She needed time to herself. So, for now, everyone was respecting her space. As for the last post, I had to address something. Some people had called me selfish, accusing my husband and me of being greedy for not offering help to Jim and Carrie. I was baffled. Who exactly thought we were in a position to give charity? We had bought our house at a good price, but it wasn't as if we were sitting on a mountain of extra funds. Jim and Carrie were financially stable. They didn't need us to take care of them. Besides, we were in the same financial position as them. The whole idea was just strange. Then there was the part about my hopes for Jim and Carrie. Some people thought I was wrong to encourage them to try to work things out. They believed Jim deserved better, and maybe he did. But at the end of the day, it was his choice. He wasn't some helpless man being mistreated. He was still in love with Carrie, and that mattered. They were about to have a baby. That wasn't something you just walked away from without a second thought. Yes, I hoped they could fix things, even if not everyone agreed with me. I wasn't trying to cause harm, I just wanted them to be happy, for their sake and for their child's sake. 3 weeks passed. A lot had changed in that time. Jim and Carrie had made a decision. They were going to try again. They had agreed to marriage counseling for a few months, see how things went. They were still living apart for now, but once the baby arrived, they planned to co-parent for a few months before deciding if they could move back in together. This wasn't the fairy tale ending that some had hoped for, but it was their decision. And at least they were trying. I wasn't on speaking terms with Carrie, but I had to respect their choice. Jim was doing what felt right for him, and nobody else could dictate that. It wasn't what I would have chosen for them, but it wasn't my marriage to fix. All I could do was hope for the best for them and their child.